As April comes to a close, as well as Alcohol Awareness Month, we want to take a closer look at the effects of alcohol use disorder on families. According to the CDC, adolescents are 4 times more likely to drink alcohol if their parents binge drink, and people who start drinking earlier in life have a higher risk of abusing alcohol or developing a disorder later in life. According to Dr. David Barb, a family physician with Mercy, girls are more likely to have alcohol use disorders than boys.
Would emphasize the issue of underage drinking. It is a much bigger problem than I think most people realize. The statistics are that up to 3% of teenagers have an alcohol use disorder already, and over 10% report drinking regularly during their high school years.
Here in Missouri, 14% of high school students admit to binge drinking. That's higher than the national average. Kelly Hendricks, the director of counseling and recovery services for Burrell Behavioral Health in Branson, says alcoholism is a family disease.
You know, children of alcoholics have a higher propensity to become alcoholics themselves. Not to mention the dangers associated with like drunk driving or neglect, things like that. Children are very susceptible. They know what's going on in their environment. You know, they know what's going on in the home.
Hendricks says there is no wait right now to get addiction services through Burrell Behavioral Health. She says they will get someone scheduled as soon as possible for treatment and an assessment. She says they also offer family counseling, and there are groups in the community for those who have a loved one with a substance use disorder like Al-Anon. You can join me on the CTV Destination